Well, good afternoon, Viva Birdos. We are here with the writing team again for another VEB podcast. That was a weird sound. Whose was that? Was that me?
That was me. My bad.
Okay, so it's like, and suddenly the smoke detectors are going off because Cardinals baseball is just that hot right now. I don't even know. But yeah, it's been a break since we've been here, and that's totally my fault as I've been traveling and doing work stuff and things that are actually more related to my real job. When I wanted to be with you guys talking about what has to be the most miserable Cardinal season that we've experienced in several years. Certainly all of us as writers, this is the first time we've gone through something like this. But hey, we're here to talk about it, and I know you want to listen. So we will cover today a little tiny bit about the All-Star game, but in talking to our writers ahead of time, doesn't seem like any of us really care about that. But then we will move into a first half review, talk a little bit about whether or not the Cardinals could sneak into the back end of the wild card playoff race. And then we'll take your questions. We had a ton of questions over on the site from all of you, questions and topics to cover. So most of our attention will be focused on the content that you want from us. So just to introduce everyone, JP Hill from the site editor. And then from my left, we've got Adam Akbani. Hey, Adam, how's it going, man?
Good, man. No, I'm just hoping no more notifications come in. Got everything muted, but ready to talk Cardinal baseball for the second half.
Right. And then from the bottom left on my screen, probably on your screen as well, we've got Blake Newberry, fresh off of his draft coverage. How are you doing, Blake?
I'm good. I'm maybe excited to start watching baseball again. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. Can't be any worse, can it? Right.
Well.
And then below us, we've got Miles Miklas's mustache, otherwise known as Gabe Simmons, is joining us as well. How you doing, Gabe?
Doing all right.
Do you think that your growth of the mustache and the hair is responsible for the Cardinals' failures this season? Because last year at this time you didn't have it. So,
God, I hope not.
We'll have to look into that. But all right, let's jump into it. All-Star game. We're at the All-Star break. You will hear this on Saturday. The Cardinals are playing again. Did any of you all watch the whole All-Star game in its entirety?
I did not, but I just want to point out how ironic it is that the least likely, or more likely the least deserving All-Star ended up being the MVP, right? It was Elias Diaz who hit the 2-run homer and ended up winning the MVP for the All-Star game. So that was cool, I guess. And then Arenado, was the lone Cardinal, but otherwise there wasn't a whole lot to look forward to if it was a Cardinals fan. But I feel like for others, definitely. But for me, not a whole lot.
I felt like as Cardinals fans, we almost deserved something from Arenado this year at the All-Star game, but in typical 2023 fashion, Arenado, I think, flied out to the second baseman, and then I don't even remember a second at bat. By then, I had moved on to other things. So, what about you guys? Did you guys even turn it on? Blake, were you so captured by your draft coverage that you never even saw
I was burnt out by the time any of the All-Star festivities happened. So I watched I think the Adolis Garcia Randy Arozarena matchup in the home run derby, and that was all of the All-Star break that I caught.
Yeah. Yep. Gabe, anything to add?
I watched I had it on, and then I kind of just glanced up, occasionally. Oh, and then Diaz homered. I saw it like that, and I watched the ninth inning that Kimbrel almost screwed up, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, there's your All-Star game, folks. Thanks for listening. Well, let's move on to I don't know whether it's more interesting or not, but at least other content. So the Cardinals have played over 81 games. They're into the second half of the season at this point. Their record is not good. I did not look it up before I started this sentence, but it is well under 500. I think they're 15 games under 500 or somewhere close to this. At this point, you really kind of stop counting because it really stops mattering. And so we're going to get into a lot of the analysis as we go forward, but I just want to hear from the four of you and just sort of like a big picture, or the four of us, I guess I've got to include myself in that big picture. What happened in the first half of the season? Like, we were all, I mean, maybe Adam was a little bit more pessimistic than us, but I know me and Blake definitely, and Gabe, like, I remember saying 95 wins, and I can't even believe I'm bringing that up now because I sure look like a total idiot. But at least in this room, I'm not alone. Guys, what happened? Let's start with Gabe. Gabe, what happened? What did I miss? What's going on, man?
If you look between this year and last year, the number one thing that has changed is defense. For some reason, Arenado has been a negative defender this year. Edmund wasn't very good in the infield when he was playing, and it like these kind of passed the eye test to some extent too. And then Jordan Walker
The worst defender.
turned a lot of outs into doubles.
Yeah.
Or outs into singles, and everybody just had to play out of position. And then Contreras was perhaps not quite as seamless of a transition as we maybe hoped. And maybe the pitchers pitched a little bit worse with him, and just everything has gone like slightly wrong. And I think with better defense, I don't want to blame it all on the defense, but like that's like the thing that sticks out to me that is completely different, where you could be like, oh, okay, there's a huge decline here, and maybe it just added up a little bit. And then the bullpen blows every 1-run lead we have. That doesn't help either.
So a little bit of context to what Gabe's saying. I looked it up here, and indeed it's true. OAA outs above average is my personal favorite defensive stat of the StatCast ones that are out. And this year he is at -3 OAA, -0.9 in UZR. UZR is a smaller scale, so not quite so high. And then DRS, defensive run saved, -4. For context, last year Arenado was +14. His high came in 2019, was +22. So going from a +22 caliber player over the course of a whole season to a -3 when you're expecting him to be one of the best defensive players in the game annually is a huge difference.
And half a season too, so he's actually -6 over a full season.
Yeah, right. No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so huge difference. And, we've had this debate a little bit ourselves. We definitely talked about it on the site a ton. We've always debated the value of defense relative to pitching and offense. We're kind of seeing to some extent, how much defense matters, but it's not the only factor, right? Blake, what do you got? What's your number one thing that you're looking at besides defense as a cause for what we've seen?
Yeah, it's like I think again, like it's just a combination of everything. So I mean, the defense is obviously terrible. The bullpen, which like coming into the year, I thought was going to be a really strong unit with like Helsley and Gallegos and Hicks, and I was really high on Hicks, and he was terrible at the beginning, and now he's really good. But
yeah.
Even Stratton, who's been a consistently good reliever for the last like 3 years, it just felt like it was a good group, and it just hasn't been, especially recently. And then I think really like I was actually looking at this today, and I think the Cardinals, we'll say position players, rank 11th in terms of total WAR among the 30 teams.
Yeah.
So if we break it out, they're like 6th in WRC plus. So offensively, they're mostly fine. I mean, it's probably not as good as we were expecting, but it's just that defense that's just been terrible. Especially relative to what we saw with the Cardinals like 2 years ago when they won 5 Gold Gloves. So I think really it's just that drop off, and then the bullpen kind of being what it is that's hurt. And if you actually look at it, the rotation, which was kind of the thing that was everybody was harping on at the beginning of the year, sitting right in the middle, 14th in WAR this season. So they've pretty much been right where we've expected them to be. And granted, that's come with some terrible Wainwright and Steven Matz performances and other people. It's been up and down, but it's really just kind of settled out right in the middle. So it's kind of like that's what we expected it to be. So it's really just been everything else that hasn't performed where we thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Adam, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys kind of hit the nail right in the head for the first couple things in terms of defense and pitching. Offense has been great. Blake mentioned the lineup is arguably top 10, if not for sure top 10 in all of baseball. So I'm not really worried there. We have seen some inconsistency from some guys. Obviously, Contreras struggled to get it going, but over the past 3 weeks, he's been the best hitting catcher in all of baseball. Arenado has been one of the best offensive third basemen in all of baseball since May. So the offenses I'm not worried about. Defensively, like Gabe mentioned, it's just night and day, has it there like it's been in years past. Jordan Walker is arguably the biggest, weakest link out there in left field and in right field. He just looks like he has like no idea what he's doing out there. And it's okay just because it's really only been about half a year of experience that he's played out there, and he had some reps last year at Springfield, but the idea was that he probably still would be a little bit better. And I think he can be, I just don't think it's going to happen this year, and hopefully they turn the page. Arenado as well. has been tough this year. But I think Arenado, the situation with him is that it's very peculiar to see such a drop off so quickly from a guy who's been so consistent all year round that it almost makes me feel like he could be hiding an injury of some sort, or he could be dealing with some sort of hamperment that is preventing him from really being able to react and read and tend to balls as quickly and as efficiently as he has in the past. That usually affects outfielders more. We've seen it with Harper, but I digress with Arenado, and I think he could potentially bounce back. But in terms of the pitching staff, we saw the bullpen kind of carry the starting rotation a little bit earlier this year, like Blake mentioned with Stratton. Verhagen was better earlier this year, and then he's just dropped off completely.
Yeah.
Hicks is very good, obviously we saw, and Gallegos in theory is good, and I think he could turn the page next year. And Helsley, when he comes back, I think he'll be good too. But I think the biggest thing is that there's been inconsistency with when they've been good and not really together at the same time. So hopefully the second half will offer some more consistency going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I mean, I think those are the big ones that jump out. The one that I've been kind of looking at, especially, and then I wrote a post about it on the offense. Really, it's the pitching side where this shows up. I don't feel like the Cardinals' development of some of their players has really helped them this year. And it's hard to put any kind of like reason why. Some was just bad luck, like injuries to Lars Nootbaar and things like that. But one of the things that we said heading into the season was that we expected Goldschmidt and Arenado to take a step back from MVP caliber performance. We expected them to be good, and they have been, but we expected that step back. But then for them to truly be an elite offense, we also, and I think all of us were kind of in agreement, expected some fairly significant steps forward from some other players, including Nootbaar, Tyler O'Neill. If he could just stay healthy, probably was going to be fairly productive. Dylan Carlson, you maybe didn't expect a huge step forward, but considering his injury hampering him for 3 or 4 weeks last year, plus the huge slump at the beginning of the season, it was easy to project him to be a significant contributor, plus Walker and Contreras and others. And there was reason for that. And then you look down through the list, especially on offense, and the guys that they were kind of hoping to step up, they really haven't. Brendan Donovan is exactly what he was last year, which is great. But all the other young players are probably a step back from what they hope for. I mean, Gorman probably, you could say that he's definitely taken some strides forward, but has a K rate over 3% again. The walk rate's there, the power's there, but his total contribution to the team, 1.2 WAR, is probably less than they hope for at this point in the season, especially considering how much time he's played in the field as opposed to DH. And then from there, it just goes down. Nootbaar, Walker, Burleson, Carlson, O'Neill, Yepez. Those are players that just didn't step forward really in any significant way. And having all of that happen at once when there were injuries really has contributed to some of that. It's worse on the pitching side. And I'm going to have an article that looks at that, here in a week or so, but Flaherty not bouncing back, Matt's not being, we had Blake and I at least had some pretty high expectations of Matt's. That hasn't happened. I don't think that's a development issue, but
still a chance. He's back in the rotation.
Still a chance. Yeah, right. But Liberatore, I can't, he hasn't taken a step forward. 3 years now, almost. He hasn't taken that step forward. Zach Thompson, they did that weird thing of sending him down, but even down in the minors, he hasn't been good. And then you can go down the list of Payante and others, just Verhagen hasn't become what he wanted to be. They just haven't gotten from some of these other players what they needed to get to cover for injuries and for declining performance. And a lot of that is snowballed with some of the injuries and poor performance from veterans. And here's where we are. So.
And I'll add another thing. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Blake mentioned the war of the hitting and pitching. I believe we are considerably lower in ERA than we are in FIP, and we're also hitting worse on runs per game than weighted runs created plus would suggest.
Yeah, I think that's true. It seems that way. Yeah,
so it feels like every single section of the team is like underperforming what their overall numbers are when it comes to like what actually is happening on the field, as opposed to. Like FIP, that is happening on the field, but like, Like for whatever reason, the runs and runs allowed is just slightly worse than it should be. And it's like that for every aspect of the team. And I don't know if that's luck or just I can't explain that, but that's just part of the deal as well. Like that's is just a little worse than we should be in every aspect of the team.
Yeah, there's been a lot of statistical weirdness going on with this year.
Let's just take a poll from the four of us here. How many of you would expect, with nothing to change on the team, as far as their numbers, how many of you would expect their record to be significantly better than what it is now based on the performance of the team statistically?
Yeah.
If they didn't change the team,
Yeah, like I mean, like literally, you subtract what we know about the win and loss totals from this team, and we just looked at the stats like we do in the offseason. Would we not expect this to be? I wouldn't expect this to be a 15 games under 500 team. I'd look at the stats and I'd expect them to be a 500 team, maybe even better, to be honest. Except for, well, maybe the defense. I factor that in. I don't know.
top 6 offense, average pitching staff. I
Yeah.
would probably expect, honestly, like 85, 86, 87 wins. If I didn't know how the season's gone.
Yeah.
Same. I mean, so I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean the Pythag kind of shows you that's what it is for. But I guess if we're not looking at win-loss record, probably it would say 80 to 85 wins. Definitely would not be looking at a projected high 60s for sure. That would definitely shock me.
Which actually makes it hard for me to believe that they're going to wind up there. Like I mean, that's where they're trending. And every time I think, oh yeah, they're bound to get it together. They're going to go on a run where they're going to win, 15 of 20 games or something like that. And that hasn't happened. It's been the opposite. They kept losing. But I'll just ask this before we start moving into the questions, which we have a lot of. Is there any chance, any hope at all in your guys' mind that they could sneak into an expanded playoffs and figure this out by the end of the season, or is it over? And whoever wants to answer first, doesn't matter. Adam's smiling and laughing, so I'll go with Adam.
As much as optimistic as I would like to be, I would probably say at this point it's gotten to the juncture where I think is they've lost too many games at the beginning of the year, and they've been a 500 team about ever since, if I'm not mistaken, or about average. And I think the losses piled on too much in April, and I think there's too many question marks going forward where I think it's probably a lost season. So I think you scrap it and you look for 2024, and I think that's the mentality the front office has as well. We saw that with the interview with Mozeliak.
Yeah, seems that way. You guys think there's any chance at all, or is it over? Done? I mean, because playing with expanded playoffs, and I'm not necessarily trying to convince you guys because I don't really think so myself, but it's not like they need to get to 87, 88 wins to have a shot at the playoffs. Maybe even 500 could give them a shot, and playing 15 above 500 is an outside shot over the course of half a season. But if we were expecting 90 to 95 wins, we were expecting them to play 20 games over 500 over the course of half a season. So not totally crazy, but not totally uncrazy either.
What are we considering a chance?
I don't know, 30%.
Oh, that's a high. Okay, I wouldn't say 30%.
25%,
like 10,
1
maybe.
in 4.
There's easily a chance, and I'm going to say why. We're 11 and a half back. We were 11 and a half back in mid-August in 2011.
Yeah,
I know we have more teams to beat, but also they are way worse than the Braves were in 2011, I think. And main reason I think there's a chance is because our division, I still don't think any of the teams above us are any good. The Reds have a -9 run differential. Who's in second? The Cubs have a positive one. They're the only team with a positive run differential. The Cubs are, and they're 5 games under 500. Everybody else has a negative run differential. Our division is beatable. I don't know if we can make up 12 games, but there's a chance easily. But I will say also, it depends on what we do at the trading deadline. Because if we trade away Montgomery and Flaherty, I mean, I would probably give up at that point because I don't know what our pitching staff looks like at that point. Unless Liberatore decides to turn into Greg Maddux.
Which he's not going to do. Not yet. Not right now, at least. Okay, so that being the case, then let me ask you this. Considering that we're giving it, a 5% chance, Gabe, 10% chance of, and you think maybe the division is more of a closer odd than even a wild card. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. So would you rather hang on to these players and have a shot at sneaking into postseason, or sell, baby, sell?
I'd say see where we're at the trading deadline. If we've made up some ground, we actually have a very easy schedule in the second half, by the way.
We do.
You don't face that many teams that hasn't really mattered so far. We lose equally to both good and bad teams. Actually, we've been playing good against good teams. The Yankees, Red Sox, Blue Jays. For some reason, we had no trouble with those teams. But how many games until the deadline? Like 14, 15?
Yeah.
You could make up some ground there in theory. I guess the question would be, how many games back would we have to be for us to be like, oh, okay, we still have a chance? And how many games back would you be like, we got to sell everybody. Let's get as much value as we can out of this failed season.
You guys got thoughts?
I would probably say they're looking to retool, probably not for a run this year, but likely just to look forward to next year. But I think I saw the official odds, or like, I guess not official odds. I don't think it's official, but it's on FanGraphs. They said it's about a 6% chance to make it in, and they're projected to win about 77 games. Which, yeah, even with an expanded play, I'm surprised it would be that much. But I guess they're probably banking on they have a pretty decent second half, and even then they're still pretty short. So yeah, it's kind of tough.
Any different thoughts on that, Blake?
No, not really. I'm kind of with Gabe. I mean, I'm fine. Give it 10 games, see what happens. Like if the Cardinals somehow come out here and go like 8-2, 7-3, whatever, make up a couple games, then maybe you think about holding on to Montgomery and just taking the qualifying offer next year or something like that. But I think it's starting to push pretty heavily into the sell territory.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some argument. We'll talk about this here in a minute with Montgomery, but there's some argument to be made. The better play isn't taking Flaherty and Montgomery, definitely Montgomery, maybe not Flaherty, taking them to a QO anyway, qualifying offer is what I mean by QO, just based on the returns for mid-rotation starters and past trade deadlines, is not as high as you might desire. Whereas they've made a lot of hay out of picks, 27 through 40. So QOs could be pretty valuable to the club, but it wouldn't help him in 2024. And I think that's what they're looking for. Do what?
Take his price down a little bit. If you offer him a QO, he rejects it, and then he might not get as good. I mean, in theory.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing with that too, though, is that, I mean, I guess it depends on how loosely we want to use the term mid-rotation started with Montgomery, because the last time I checked, which like admittedly was a few weeks ago, he was 16th and
well, this year, and he's got his history. So it's like, how much is he? What's he valued at? What's his worth?
That's more in the mid-rotation starter. So I feel like
right,
definitely more value.
Yeah.
Well, 16th and F4. Oh, I was just gonna say 16th and F4 is more like almost ace caliber.
Oh yeah,
player.
yeah.
He's looking at probably at this point he's probably looking more at 20 million plus. So I'd be surprised if he were to take that qualifying offer. I think.
There's no way he would take it.
There's no way
the Cardinals would take the draft pick and the no risk that came along with it. It's just literally a question of whether you think the Cardinals can make more long term out of pick 33 or whatever it would be versus what kind of prospect are they going to get for it? Because we're not talking about a top 50 prospect. For a rental, it's possible. It seems unlikely. Honestly, a lot of, and kind of looking through it last year and listening to the Off Days podcast, I think they were a little low on Montgomery's projections and comparable trades. They mentioned Syndergaard, and I think that Montgomery is a full step above Syndergaard. But you were talking about someone outside of the top 10. I think it was the Phillies, in their system. So not a great return for what at that time could be classified as a mid to back end rotation starter. I think Montgomery beats that, but does Flaherty? I don't know that he does. There might be a team out there that wants to get him in house, take a look at him for the hope of signing him long term. And I think he's going to be better next year than he was this year because he's knocking the rust off. But again, getting a 45 future value, now versus having the chance to get a 50 or 55 in the draft pick, and that might not even happen, but it could. I could see an argument for keeping him. And if you're keeping him, you got to run in you. But that wouldn't stop me from trading to Young or trading Stratton or maybe even Hicks. I'd have to think about Hicks. It would depend on Helsley's strategy, but
I mean, go for it. No, you got it.
All right. I was just gonna say, like, if you were to get rid of Montgomery, what would that look for next year? I mean, if the Cardinals are not going to go after another starter this offseason, or if they're not going after another in the trade deadline or trying to replenish, and you lose Montgomery, you go into next season with Michaelis as your ace, which you did this year. But who's your second starter? Is it Steven Matz? Is it?
They're going to sign somebody else.
Oh yeah, they're going to have to sign 4 guys.
They're going to do something.
Right now they can put in there. Yeah.
So I totally see from a money perspective and why, ordinarily speaking, if the Cardinals had the kind of pitching that we would have liked, you could make the case for letting Monty walk, but as thin as it already is, I was talking with Blake about this. There's a decent foundation already, but that's the foundation. If you lose the foundation, you have nothing else. So what you have is the bare minimum that you want to be working with and building forward for next year. And if you're losing your best starter by a long shot, then you have arguably the worst rotation. Well, not arguably, probably a bottom 5 rotation in baseball.
Yeah,
I mean, they could resign him if they trade him anyway.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
It's unlikely.
yeah.
It doesn't happen very often, but I don't know why. It just doesn't,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would
I mean-
say, and there's a question, you know what? Let's hold that thought, because there's 2 questions about Monty coming up in the questions that both connect to this. And so we'll get to that because it'll address exactly what you're saying. And I keep wanting to go on that. So we'll stop that off right there. And the other thing I was going to say about selling versus keeping is that the Cardinals, I wouldn't say they've complained, but they've certainly made a lot of noise about the fact that they're always drafting at the back part of the first round. I mean, rarely are they drafting above 22. Well, they're going to this year, and that trickles down. So every pick is better throughout the whole draft. And I personally, as much as I hate a losing season, as much as I do think they got a chance to get back into it, I'd rather just do a quick fake tank and get rid of as many people as you can, flush the system full of quad A and MLB ready talent, quote unquote talent. None of these maybe are guys that are any better than your Burlesons or your Pez's, but you collect enough of those guys, you go into the offseason, you've got real ammunition for trades to refill this rotation. So do that, get your low draft picks, retool with some talent in your system, give it another run in 2024, and let 2020 be what it, or 2023 be what it is. So all right, you guys ready to take some questions? Oh, we got to do the draft. Totally forgot about the draft. Blake, you're up, man, because I've got a little bit to say about some of these guys, but mostly not. Let's just hit the highlights. And I don't know if Adam and Gabe, if you had a chance to follow it or not. I know you guys kind of follow it at least a little bit. Let's just talk about the first player, Chris and/or Crash and/or Chase Davis. Do we know that he has a nickname at all, or is it just Chase?
I think it's just Chase Davis, but we were joking. There was a joke on VEB in the comments because he doesn't actually chase a lot, but his name should be Discipline Davis.
Discipline Davis.
We'll see if that sticks.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the big things that's changed about him this year, right? Is his approach at the plate approach, his control, strikeout numbers, things like that.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things about him is he's never really chased a ton. He's just had a lot of swing and miss, and he really just cut down on the swing and miss this year. Like I think his chase rate actually ticked up a little bit this year, but he just started hitting the ball way more. And that really, for a guy with like the power that he has and the arm that he has and the chance to stick in center field, although he'll probably end up moving to one of the corners, like that was really what he needed to come around on, was the hit tool. And he made big strides there.
So what kind of power are we talking about? Are we talking about Walker power? Or are we talking about Gorman power? Or are we talking about Carlson power?
I mean, I don't think it's hard to match Walker power. It's probably something more like Gorman power, maybe a little bit more. He's just a really, like, I mean, you can even see it when he, like, the frame that he has, the swing that he has, like everything about him is just powerful. So it's probably Gorman with potentially more, but not quite Walker.
Yeah. Okay, so if you guys, I've been thinking about this the last couple of days. I haven't been able to come up with anyone, I'll be honest. If you guys had to comp him to another player that the Cardinals have drafted in your lifetime, anyone come to mind? It doesn't even have to be a close comp. You know my thoughts on comps. I'm not big on comps, but as an example of what this player is like, a fairly disciplined, high power player that has the ability to potentially stick in center field. I mean, who are we talking about here? Anybody?
Cardinals, I don't think they've drafted anybody like that in years.
Right. Well, that's what it seemed like. I mean, going back to totally different caliber prospect, but going all the way back to JD Drew,
Colby Rasmus.
Rasmus seems way more athletic at that time. Rasmus was a huge athlete at that time. So
the closest I can think of.
Yeah.
Wasn't he high school too? Yeah. Scratch that.
He was right. Yeah.
I feel like Carlson, just by convention, is your closest quote unquote comp, even though the power is just obviously no comparison. I'm just saying by positional wise and somewhat athletically, Chase Davis has a better arm and is likely probably a better contact hitter, I would say. But I mean, Carlson is just the idea that there is a right fielder, corner outfielder with plus contact skills, even though Davis wipes him off the floor with his power skills, absolutely, and his arm.
Yeah. So kind of a unicorn for the Cardinals to go after a play like this and be able to get them. And yeah, we'll see. Where do you guys expect him to start next year? Or well, this year, I guess. I guess he'll probably play some this year.
Probably rookie ball, single A.
Think he'll be an A ball next year or A plus?
Single A.
Yeah, I think he'll be an A+ next year, probably in Peoria. I think that he might get like 10 games, 15 games at Palm Beach this year, before he goes up. But we'll see. I mean, I think they're not going to stick him down there in single A for too long.
Yeah. Oh, I thought of the guy. Okay, I remember the name. And this is a bad comp because he hasn't really worked out. And that's part of the problem with comps is that you want to stick with players that have worked out. But like where would Davis rank around someone like Nick Plummer when we drafted Plummer?
Nick Plummer was more of like a 5-tool all-around athletic center fielder. Davis, yeah. Plummer was definitely a plus speed guy and a 5-tool potential when he was drafted, but
okay.
Davis is much more of a polished player, but you know more what you're getting and you know more what you're also not getting with Davis just by convention of him being a 3-year college guy versus Plummer being a high school guy out of Minnesota or
That's
Michigan.
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I
It's
just
hard
couldn't
to
remember
tell
what Plummer's power, profile looked like when he first came up. I know that the walks and stuff developed over time, but I couldn't remember the power when we first drafted him. So
He
yeah.
also had that cold weather thing, and I think he started with like 2 strikes in his league or something, or 2 balls. I forgot what it was. He had really weird rules wherever he played in high school, and so he was a lot more unknown, I think, than most first rounders.
Yeah. Okay, so there's Davis. Of the next 2 or 3 draft picks, Blake, who do you want to talk about?
Well, we can just start with Honeyman since he was the next one.
Yeah.
I think he's the guy who was pretty interesting. I probably wouldn't have gone with Honeyman in the 3rd round. And now that admittedly, I don't know who I would have gone with in the 3rd round. But when we come from a guy like Davis, who has a lot of tools, Honeyman's maybe not as toolsy, but he's a little more across the board. Part of the issue with him is he was projected, or at least in a lot of people's like 1st round grade kind of area on the big board. He had some injuries, didn't play as much in college as he probably would have wanted to. I don't know if he ever cleared 200 plate appearances in the season.
Oh, wow.
But I think there's probably more power to be had in him. I think he had a little bit more of a ground ball oriented approach, but he seems like a guy he's going to play all 3 outfield positions. I don't know where he's going to stick, but there's not really a big weakness. There's just not like a standout tool like there is with Davis.
Yeah. Steven Piscotty?
Yeah.
As a comp,
That could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not huge into comps, but like, yeah, that could be.
I know. Yeah. I'm just trying to give a guy, someone to say, oh, not Jordan Walker, but more like, just a good all around hitter who might or might not develop power. And that could be what does him in. So,
yeah.
Cool.
I mean, how deep do you want to go into it?
I don't know. Give us a player you really like. Give us another play. One more player you really like.
Worley.
So say briefly, I'll group some of them together. I liked the 5th rounder, Zach Levinson. And I'll group him with, I think it was our 12th and 13th rounders. It was can't remember their names, like first baseman, corner outfield guy out of LSU, and then Sean Sullivan too. All 3 of those guys just absolutely mashed. They have a ton of power. So that's just kind of why I'm grouping them together. I think, in fact, Sullivan, who we took him the 13th, had a higher max exit velo than Chase Davis. Levinson had a pretty similar 90th percentile exit velocity as Chase Davis, took him in the 5th. Now, all those guys have a little more swing and miss than Davis does, and probably a little less defensive upside, but the power potential is definitely still there for those 3. And then I'll say the Cardinals took 2 lower upside pitchers with their first 2 pitcher picks, but I think 7 through 9, they took 3 pitchers that I really like, who all have strikeout potential. And then I think it was 14, maybe they took a JUCO kid who just has like a 99 mile an hour, or can get his fastball up to 99, ton of spin, a lot of ride on the fastball, like just like textbook strikeout stuff. He just absolutely cannot find the zone. So, I mean, he's 19 or 20 or something like that. So it's more of like maybe a longer term upside play, but I love the Cardinals actually taking some guys with some swing and miss, some of those guys who do have some higher end potential if they hit on day 3 of the draft. And I think that's what they did really well, because guys like Quinn Matthews and Savakul are probably a little potential limited, little ceiling limited. Although Matthews I like a lot better than Savakul.
And I think it would be a huge. I mean, I'm assuming those guys went a little low because I've got some concerns somewhere in there, their makeup. But to get even some high octane bullpen guys, down from the 12th and 13th round, that's a plus for an organization. So.
Yeah, and a lot of those guys too were in the bullpen in college, but I think that's probably part of why they dipped or they had injury concerns. Like our 9th rounder Worley had injury concerns. He's recovering from Tommy John now, but a lot of guys had a 3rd or 4th round grade on him coming into the year, and that was before he got hurt and didn't have the chance to prove himself. So I think honestly those 3 7 through 9 are all going to start in the rotation and work their way up that way, even though they pitched pretty much exclusively from the bullpen in college. Although 7th, 8th rounder, one of the 3 was a starter in college, so he'll stay, but the other 2 are relievers, and I think they'll become starters in pro ball. They have the arsenal for it.
Great. Adam, Gabe, you guys got anything to add to Blake's? Blake's the one who's really digging into that, both for us and for the Cardinal Nation. So you guys get anything to add to his analysis?
No, the only one is that the 20th rounder that was not expected to sign has already announced he's going to LSU, basically. Yeah. So that was a long shot the whole way, though.
Yeah. Might as well take a chance. So.
No, I personally didn't get to watch a ton of the draft, so I was took a backseat to Blake, and I know he worked really hard on this, and he did a really good job writing. I guess I just kind of a question I had about Quinn Matthews. I kind of heard on Twitter that he wasn't really like the power strikeout guy. He's obviously more that finesse control guy, where he kind of proved it, where he threw like 150 pitches against Texas, right? And
156, yeah.
Yeah, that's wild for sure. So he's definitely someone I feel could be eating a lot of innings in the major leagues, or if he were to ever get there. But yeah, for sure. Like I think the power stuff guys were really selected later towards the draft. Was that you mentioned, and we would ideally like to be seeing the team selecting more of those guys towards the front, because those are obviously your players who are more likely to become stars at the major league level. So, but I mean, obviously you do get your diamonds in the rough. Hopefully that MO changes going forward in the years, and it kind of has. We have seen a shift, but we like to see that overhaul in 2024 and in years forward.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'll say about Matthews too is like I don't want to be too hard on him, because he definitely has more swing and miss potential than somebody like McGreevy. He missed more bats in college than McGreevy did in a bigger conference. He's going to strike out more bats than McGreevy is. Obviously, the command or the control probably isn't there as much. But I think one of the things that's interesting about Matthews is he's a senior, but he still has some projection left on his body. He's like 6'5" and 188 or something like that. So he could easily put on like another 20, 30 pounds and add a couple of ticks of his velocity. So that would help the fastball. I think that would help the slider a ton. I think his slider needs to be a little bit sharper, but like there's the potential there for him to be there. There's a ton of mileage on his arm though, so I don't think he's going to pitch again this year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, makes sense.
The funny thing about Matthews, I don't know if you guys saw the quote after he threw 156 pitches. He said he didn't think it was a big deal because he threw a lot of changeups. But isn't the whole idea behind a changeup is
the exact same as your fastball? Yeah.
Right. Oh, well, that's the draft. Good job, guys. We'll have some more coverage, I think, of that in the offseason. I want to dig into some organizational philosophy stuff this offseason, and so we can talk a little bit about their approach and drafting velocity and signing velocity and targeting and developing velocity. So we'll hit on that as we go. But now we got so many questions from the website over at Viva Birdos. I just want to kind of hit those, and they're kind of in the order that they were submitted, and some of them, with 550 comments to go through, it was really hard to tell what was a question for us and what was a question or a comment for, in response to something else. So I did the best I could, and I picked out, 5 or 6 here that I think were fairly representative of what was going on the board yesterday. So we'll start here with a question from Lovebirds. He says, according to prevailing wisdom, Ollie is protected by Mo, and Mo is protected by DeWitt. At what juncture of losing does DeWitt lose patience and start fresh? End of year, next year if bad? And so I'll start with Gabe here. Gabe, to Lovebird's question, how safe is Ollie and how safe are Mo?
For now, I think they're both very safe. And I would also say if he's gonna, panic and want to, change things, he should probably open the wallet.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's that panicked about having a winning record, and I think that's the first place he has to look, and just be willing to open the pocketbook a little bit and spend more than he would normally. That's what I think his response should be, instead of necessarily looking at Mozeliak or Marmol for now, at least. If we have multiple losing seasons in a row or multiple disappointing seasons in a row, then I think they can become part of the conversation. But right now we're at a half a year. Mozeliak's had 14 or 15 straight winning seasons before now. And Marmol had by all accounts, a great year last year. Nobody was unhappy with his performance last year. So I don't know. It seems like, I don't know if like a manager is really changing the record that much. I think that's a kind of a myth. When they fire the manager and they start playing better, I think that's because they were likely to play better anyway. So I don't think either are going to be in danger through this year, at least.
Do you guys, any of you two, think that any of the coaching staff is in danger this year? Considering their record right now and their performance, their underperformance, anyone at risk at all?
No, I don't think so. I agree with Gabe. And I'll say, I don't think Mo is getting fired, period. Like, I think he's just going to ride out the end of his contract. There is like rumors that he's going to move on to something else. So I think that's just going to be that. He's going to ride out his contract and that'll be it. I think Marmol's maybe in danger next year.
Mm-hmm.
If the team finishes this year poorly, comes out and starts next year poorly, then he might be gone. Or at least then he might be on the hot seat. I don't think anybody's getting fired this year or this offseason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. We got to remember that the role of the manager has dwindled drastically over the course of the last decade or so, and a lot of decisions are made by front offices. So that being said, Ollie, I think the only situation, especially with only like 80 to 90 games of struggling, the only situation where Ollie loses his job, and even if it's like, it wouldn't even be this year, is that if he starts losing control of the locker room, which we kind of saw to a degree earlier this year with the whole ordeal, not to be rhyming, but the whole situation there was kind of risky, and we kind of saw a little, like, it wasn't the greatest. But I think that's for Marmol is fine. In terms of Mozeliak, he's almost like, I would kind of agree with Blake. He's almost immortal to a degree, where he's been there for 15 years or almost longer than that, right? These guys in the front office, remember, it's a business, and as long as the team is still profiting and they're not losing for a long sort of like, for prolonged sort of several years, like Blake had theoretically mentioned, Mozeliak and his crew, Gersh, all those boys will be fine, and they're not going to lose their job. And especially this year, it's way too early. And like we've mentioned before, like a lot of other franchises are more patient, and they let their like guys kind of struggle for a while, and then they get hammered. But then even this year with the Cardinals, we're seeing just how much backlash the front office is getting, even after how much success they've had. So I think we kind of need to put things into perspective. Yes, there are things to be improved on, but we can't lose perspective on just how good the front office has been. Like, obviously, just Mozeliak is one person, but the entire team, from data guys, from analytics guys, all the way through, they've been doing a great job. It's just been a bad year, and we know what the problem is. So those can be addressed. And if the problem persists for 2024 or 2025 and onward, then you start looking at making adjustments. But I think right now the staff is relatively safe, and I think the changes need to be made on the field.
The only pushback that I'd give to you guys, I largely agree, but I think that the one way that that Marmol is at risk is if his interpersonal skills and his relationships with players and coaches isn't up to a fairly high standard of leadership. And we saw a little bit of that with O'Neal and a few other things. And again, I've brought up this before. I'm not trying to make too much of it. And I think when Jeff Jones was on, he kind of explained a little bit around it, but they did lose a good portion of their coaching staff last year. And then, Holiday, that didn't work out. And so if there starts to be trouble with players and there starts to be ongoing trouble with coaches, and that becomes a revolving door a little bit because of some sort of work environment, we don't know these things now, but that is really, in my opinion, more likely an area where someone like Marmol could find themselves in trouble. Not necessarily the performance on the field, although that's usually what gets managers on other teams fired. What gets managers on the Cardinals fired is interpersonal relationship issues. So I could see that potentially being a problem going forward. So here's another one. I think we kind of already hit on this, but I did want to read it. Game 7 asks, how would you convince me that there's an actual structural problem here that can't just be chalked up to a terrible start? What have we learned that we didn't really already know or suspect back in March? Do you guys kind of agree with the inclination there that yeah, a terrible start did this team in, but do you guys think there's a real structural issue at work here? Or is it just bad luck?
It's a little bit of both, I would say. I mean, we kind of predicted earlier before the season started that things arguably weren't going to be I mean, at least I said that at the minimum, that there were flaws on the team that would potentially prevent them from being a playoff team, and that's obviously happened this year. But it would also be unfair to say that it's all on the team itself. That, you know, how many we can feel as a fan base, we can see when watching the games, we can feel the frustration and the unluck that happens at times, where you see a hardliner just caught and then like a runner is doubled up, or you see a fielder make a poor mistake, and these are all correctable things going forward. But to say that it's all going to be to pin it on one thing for sure, I think it's unfair. But definitely there were concerns going into the season that could have been addressed in the off season, that potentially could have buoyed or lamented some of the frustrations that we're seeing this year. But it's definitely been frustrating from a luck perspective as well. It kind of goes, it's two faceted in my opinion.
Yeah. You guys got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some bad luck. I think there were some bad decisions that were made, like Jordan Walker starting the year up in the majors. Like, regardless of how good his bat is, he's a negative player in terms of WAR because his defense is just that bad.
Yeah.
So I would like, and even the weird, like, I didn't understand bringing up Jordan Walker to keep Dylan Carlson on the bench, and especially when we look at how bad the defense has been, I would almost prefer just playing Dylan Carlson every day. And obviously, like, Walker's up here, he's going to play. The season's practically lost anyways at this point, so you might as well just let him work through some of the growing pains. But it felt like it would have been a better decision to let him get those reps in AAA. So I would hope, I mean, the front office, I don't know if they've addressed this at all. I don't imagine they're going to, because I don't imagine they want to say they should have left their top prospect in AAA who's killing the ball in the majors in AAA. But I would hope they've learned at least from the decision. And I think like some of that is taking a little bit of less of a priority on defense. So I would say there's that, and then just kind of the general approach to pitching, which we've harped on for years. So that's where I think it gets interesting this year, is the Cardinals now have to remake their rotation a little bit. They have to add to it. When they're at the deadline, who are they trading for? When they're in free agency, who are they signing? This gives them the chance to sign pitchers with a little bit of a different profile than we've seen in the past. So this is, to me, almost kind of like a litmus test. Are the Cardinals going to keep doing the same thing they've done when it comes to pitching, or are they going to switch it up a little bit? So that's,
I think part of that too is like it kind of like, I think there's just been a lot of misevaluation that's taken place, or maybe some forgetfulness. Like back in the mid 20 teens, when we were in the Matheny era and we were winning games, we did kind of have a similar approach to pitching, but the ceiling and the floor were much higher. We were running guys like Waka and Martinez and Wainwright in his prime and older out there, and then supplementing them with guys like Kim. Remember when we brought Mikolas in? Mikolas, started at this level, whereas the guy we're bringing in now is like Verhagen, right? Verhagen is like that 2 years ago, that Mikolas level international signing, and everything's just sort of dropped down. The ceiling and the floor has dropped down as Wainwright's gotten older, and Mikolas has become, instead of just a fourth starter that they brought in from overseas, now he's at the top, and they don't have Martinez, they don't have a Waka, they don't have some of those other names that just kind of set there in the middle. And I guess Matt's was kind of supposed to be that, but even he didn't really have that kind of profile in his past of, I think, one season where he's over like 1.5 WAR in his career. So that's going to have to change. And I think there was some misevaluation with that. And if going forward, it's just going to have to change. So
yeah, but I think the offense largely just rebounds.
Natural. Yeah. Here's our 2 Montgomery questions. We promised we'd come back to this from both Salty Cracker and Crazy One. Why didn't the team make more of an effort to sign Montgomery to an extension instead of opting for Matz or for Mikolas? Gabe, I'll give you that one.
We don't know how much of an effort they made to try to re-sign Montgomery, like at all. Because, I mean, first off, he's operating in a place where they just had a huge offseason for starting pitchers. So if he has a good season, he's looking ahead. I could make a lot of money. Yeah, so why would I settle for anything less than like 120 million over 5 years, or maybe even a 6-year deal? Maybe he's thinking that optimistically, where there's not a whole lot of upside for him. I mean, aside from the whole not getting hurt thing, there's not a whole lot of upside for him to sign anything too. I don't want to say team friendly, but not like where if he signed it, we'd be why would we sign that? Like, we'll just wait a year out. We might be able to get him in free agency for that anyway. So I think that's the crux of it. Basically, is first up, we don't even know. We're not privy to what they're doing behind the scenes at all. So we don't know how they tried. And I'm guessing his asking price was rightfully and understandably more than you'd like prior to a season being played, because anything can go wrong during the season. He can get hurt, anything. That's basically what I think. And Michaelis was like operating where he's 35. So he just had much more incentive to sign a deal, and a lot more could go wrong with him this year. And his asking price was so much lower than what Montgomery will get. So I don't even know if they're comparable, honestly.
Yeah. It seems like Mikolas was easy and doable, so they did it, which has kind of been the Cardinals' MO. Easy and doable, let's do it. Montgomery was practically not doable and very difficult. So
to add to that, though, let's also keep in mind that Jordan Montgomery's agent is Scott Boras, and Scott Boras clients never sign contract extensions.
Yeah, right.
That's so.
Yeah,
I don't imagine really that would have been an easy negotiation in the offseason to try to get Jordan Montgomery to come back.
Yeah. Moving on to the second question, and Adam, I'll throw this one at you. Do the Cardinals trade Montgomery, or do they try to re-sign him this offseason? I don't know whether they couldn't do both, by the way. And accept that all they might get is a comp pick. What would such a deal look like? What would you do? So trade, re-sign, comp pick. What would you do?
Yeah, so we kind of discussed this, but I guess I'll kind of start with what we haven't already talked about. In terms of the comp pick, I think just basic accounting terms tells you that you want your future value right now rather than your future. You want your present value over your future value later on. So I think, and especially given how difficult top of the line rotation starters, how difficult they are to find, especially if you're a team that doesn't have any coming up in your own pipeline, I really don't think you can afford to try to meddle around and hope that your comp pick 3 or 4 years from now, probably even longer, ends up being an ace caliber starter. So that being said, I really do believe that the Cardinals ought to re-sign Montgomery. And we knew as a fan base that it wasn't going to be the prettiest from a rotation perspective. And I agree with Blake 100% that it was never going to be an easy, it was never going to be a cakewalk negotiating with Boras, and it never is with any client. That's why he's the best in the game. But you got to at least try and at least kick the tires. And I'm sure they did, right? And we don't hear a lot because there's just so much that happens behind the scenes, and the reporters like Jeff and Katie and all these people do a fantastic work, but there's only so much that actually gets through. So I really do believe that no matter what, there is still not a lot with this rotation if they were to lose Montgomery, right? We mentioned that if it's Michaelis at the top of rotation, who do you have as your number 2? Is it Steven Matz? Is it Matthew Liberatore? Is it Dakota Hudson, God forbids? Is it somebody else? It's not someone who's going to make you competitive no matter who it is, and it's going to be a group of guys who are going to keep you having the same problems that you had this year if you continue having misfortunes. So that being said, in terms of the draft pick or the qualifying offer, I would absolutely, like, if you offer, you just offer by convention, but you want to try to work in good faith with Jordan and bring him back, because he's going to be your number 1 starter next year. Granted, like, assuming they don't bring anyone else back. So, or they don't try to make an extra addition to the team via trade or signing a la Dylan Cease or Aaron Nola, respectively. So absolutely try to bring him back, is my opinion.
Yeah. Let's take these as one shot. So I'm just going to pick one of you guys, and if it sparks some discussion, we'll go, but we're already pretty close to the hour mark, and we've got another 10 questions here. So this is from, oh, by the way, that one was from Bedivere. I didn't say the name, so thanks for the question, Bedivere. We appreciate it. Here from Shredbird. I like these names. My name is not nearly as creative as everyone else's. Shredbird, this is more of a statement than a question, but I wanted to address it, and I kind of mentioned it before. We've been doing this approach in pitching where we seem to shop in the middle of the market for reliability at a good price, and he cites Leak and Matz. Fair enough, but what we haven't done in a while is take some low dollar gambles on pitchers with upside. And I think if I remember right, he mentioned Jeff Suppan, which I wouldn't put in that category, but Chris Carpenter, who certainly would fit. And what I would say to that, Shredbird, is that I think the Cardinals have to some extent. It just hasn't been quite as obvious. And I mentioned, for example, Kim is a good example. That Kim had pretty good stuff and a pretty good track record in Japan and was a fairly decent starter, but he was never able to translate that into real innings. And so there's one that they did, a low dollar gamble on a guy that might play up once he got to the States. I think Verhagen is an example of a guy who might have fit that a little bit, not quite the same as Carpenter, but again, a guy who was overseas that had really good stuff. I still think Verhagen's got good stuff. It just doesn't play the way that it did. But they saw that, they thought it was possible, and it didn't happen. Mikolas was that guy when they brought him over. And then the last point that I'll have on that is that one of the reasons the Cardinals haven't gone outside the organization to do that is they felt like they had a lot of those guys inside the organization that could fill that role. And I think Jack Flaherty is a perfect example. If Jack Flaherty had been a free agent coming into this season, his career would have looked very, very similar to Chris Carpenter's when he came over from Toronto. And so that's one of the reasons why the Cardinals took I can't really say took a chance, but stuck with Flaherty, because there was always that chance that Flaherty would become the ace that, his stuff indicated that he could be. Now, it hasn't happened this year. It might happen next year, and I guarantee someone's going to pay money for it to maybe happen next year. Probably won't be the Cardinals, but it could be. So that's still something that they're doing, and I would expect at least one or two of those guys coming in next season, since they've got 4 rotation spots to fill. Okay, from Frank is Dead. Don't know who Frank is, and I'm sorry he's dead, but from Frank is Dead. This is kind of a longer one, and so I'll go ahead and pick Blake for this one, Sue. Pay attention, Blake.
Thanks.
The team had a run of pretty bad bullpen signings. Hollins, Cecil, Miller. Since Miller, they seem to have been hesitant to commit to relievers on a long-term basis. Do you think that reflects a change in strategy, or is it simply because they have been able to churn out high-quality arms and haven't needed to look to the open market?
I think it is partially a change in strategy. You get burned so many times on the reliever market, you're just not going to want to do it again, especially when there's a ton of relievers available every year for a lot cheaper. I also don't think they've churned out. I'd have to think about. I don't think they've churned out that many like really high quality arms.
Yeah.
But like I don't know. I just feel like the way they approach bullpen signings is just wrong in general. I'm starting to grow more and more into the belief that you honestly don't need to look at a reliever's numbers that much. If you look at the stuff that they had and what they can do well and just play to their strengths, a lot of teams have relievers who like have a fastball that plays up in the zone and they just target the knees or something. Like there's a lot of teams who aren't that good in terms of pitching strategy and pitching development. Like I think the Rockies or the Pirates or any team that's at the bottom of your standings. Like if you find a guy with good stuff and just figure out how it plays, that's what I'd love to see the Cardinals do more of, because those are the guys who you generally can sign on those 1-year cheaper deals, like prove it. But the kind of thing, the issue with prove it deals then is that you have to have guys who are able to step up if they don't prove it. And I think the Cardinals have had a little bit of a lack of that in recent years too. So I think it's just kind of not a great bullpen approach overall. I honestly am glad they're not signing long-term relievers anymore. But I would like to see them switch the kind of guys that they're signing and potentially go for some of those more upside guys who you can find for cheaper and maybe try to make a tweak, as opposed to signing a guy who's steady, I guess. For not that both relievers really are steady, and a lot of their relievers really haven't even been that great. But I think that they just don't have a great approach.
Wouldn't Zuniga fit into that category of guys with great stuff with you're ignoring the numbers a little bit?
Yeah, but he's also been hurt, so it's kind of tough to tell anything with him.
Yeah,
volatility I like
goes into this too.
I just want to see more of it.
Yeah. Okay, Gabe, moving on to you. This is from Tommy Fanatic. He had 3 questions. I'm going to pick one of them. Okay. Okay, I'll give you this one. You won't be able to answer it very well, but I'll give it to you anyway. How much of the pitching issues can be laid at Contreras' feet, and how much is pitcher underperformance? Do you think Contreras will be a Cardinal for the remainder of his career?
Oh, that last one's tough. I think it's kind of, it's tough to say because they're not like underperforming that much. And to the extent that they are, Adam Wainwright, which I don't think you could blame for Contreras.
Yeah.
And Although Michaelis in his first few starts, maybe you could blame on Contreras a little bit because that was very hittable. And I don't know if it's his fault. I don't know if it was just that they didn't really pitch and catch together during spring training, like at all, because of the World Baseball Classic. It's probably a combination, honestly, that just, he's making them pitch a little bit worse, and they are underperforming as well. And maybe they kind of combine to create this, like the pitchers pitch worse because of him. And then I don't know, but will he be a Cardinal for all 5 years? That's hard. There's no comparable for me to try to look at because he's a catcher, not an outfielder or anything. I'll say no, but he's going to be a Cardinal for at least a few years. I don't think they're going to trade him anytime soon.
Okay. I'll take this one. I'm going to take another one from Tommy Fanatic because I think this is the one I should have asked you, Gabe. This would have been right up your alley, but I'm going to take it instead. Do you think the Cardinals will fix their pitching staff in the offseason, or are we going to be relying on Liberatore / Thompson / Palante, et cetera, to take that next step forward? Here's what I'll say. In that Mozeliak interview that we've referenced a couple times, you can go listen to it and find it out on the internet. It's out there. One of the things that Mozeliak said is that he had penciled Hudson into this rotation. Okay. So there's a good example of what the Cardinals think about the internal options. I think that all four of us were pretty much ready to see Hudson go, but the Cardinals still had him as a starter. That's the top 5 coming into spring training, according to Mozeliak. So will they go into the offseason with some new pitchers? Yes. Will they also rely upon some combination of Liberatore, Thompson, Palante, et cetera? Yeah, they will.
Well, he also said they were going to do a different change in strategy, though.
Well, they said that, but
maybe that's what's going to change.
Maybe so. But I'm just saying that anyway, the numbers don't change. Like they're not going to bring in 10 starting pitchers, right? And so a 5-man rotation is really a 10-man rotation. And so you're going to see Thompson, you're going to see Liberatore, you're going to see Palante as part of that depth chart somewhere. And I think they'll probably bring in at least 3 guys to sit at that top, and Matz might be one of them. I'm not sure. I would think a two of those spots. Well, I guess because of Mikolas. Let's say Mikolas at the top, and then 3. That last spot is gonna be someone that would be competing with Thompson, Liberatore, probably not Hudson, probably not Palante, but maybe someone in that class. Like one of those guys is going to get that job. And throw McGreevy and Gersepo is there an option too, but there'll be competition for that last spot, maybe that last 2. So are they relying on him? Hard to say that, but they're going to be in the mix. I'll put it that way.
I also say before the next question, to support your point before about trading Montgomery and stuff to get a higher draft pick, another thing in support of that would be you could put like McGreevy, maybe Liberatore, maybe Connor Thomas, see what they got for 2 months. See if they can get a major league hitters out. And if they can't, well, then you can't put them in the 5. And if they can, you probably still want to make them the 6th guy. And then you feel more comfortable when you get 5 other guys.
Let's move down to the next one. Beans 16. I'm not sure which one of you wants to take this. I'll admit I haven't gotten to watch him that much. I've got an idea here, but he says, I'm curious about Liberatore and why the improved velo and stuff that we saw in spring training hasn't translated to success this year. Quick glance at the heat maps makes it look like his primary pitches are dead center a lot of the time, except when he's walking everybody. Is it as simple as that, as missing spots in command, or something else going on? Any of you want to take that one, Liberatore?
Yeah, I can start with that one at least. Like,
okay.
First off, Liberatore's command, at least when I've seen it, has just been like not
trash. Yeah,
he started out actually, interestingly enough, in the year like targeting up in the zone with his fastball.
Yeah,
he missed up a lot of times, but now when you look at the heat map, it's just dead center with this fastball. Like he really just can't hit the same spots he was hitting when he started. So I don't know what's going on there.
And he's throwing it 60% of the time too. So
yeah. So that's the other issue, is that he's throwing a million fastballs and his fastballs are terrible. So he should be throwing more curveballs, and his slider, which is actually good, he's throwing like 9% of the time.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a pitch mix issue there too. But then also we saw it in spring training, and even honestly at the start of the year when he first started pitching, his fastball did look better. It was getting more of that rising effect. It wasn't dropping as much. Now when you look at it, it's just falling right back to what it was. So I saw the numbers on it actually today too. He's at 16 inches of induced vertical break, which is what kind of creates that rising effect when you have a high amount of induced vertical break, and that's dead average for the league. So basically, he has a dead average fastball with basically average velocity. That's pretty much a textbook recipe to get crushed, especially when you throw it
with poor command. You throw on poor command on an average fastball, and it's a terrible fastball. I think that's what you're doing with.
And he throws it 60% of the time.
60%, yeah.
I'm no scout, but I think his main issue is just that whenever I've watched him pitch, he cannot for the life of him locate his curveball. Like his curveball has been terrible for some reason.
Yeah.
And if you take away his, one of his better pitches, I mean, you pair that with a fastball that doesn't really like. I blame it more on his trouble locating his breaking pitches than his fastball, because his fastball is always going to be like playing off of the breaking pitches. And if you can't play him off, then he's got to throw his fastball in the zone too much to try to not be behind every hitter and walk every hitter.
Yeah. And honestly, the way the Cardinals have treated him, they act like a team that's not very confident in him at all. Like they're trying to give him a shot. And they know they have to use him, but short rest, short outings here and there. They're like, can we avoid this guy at all possible? So I don't think they've ever, at least the management, not the front office, but field management has had a whole lot of confidence in his ability to get outs last year or this year. And I think it's showing up. So.
Well, and that's part of the issue too. When I talk about like finding guys who are underperforming and doing what they're good at, that's just something the Cardinals haven't been great at. And we see, like, for us, it seems pretty clear as day what Libby's bad at, and it just he hasn't made changes to his pitch mix. His fastball hasn't gotten better. Like they just haven't really done anything to make him a better pitcher.
Right. Yeah, and then they're having him the way they're using him accentuates his deficiencies, right? So yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I don't know. So there you go. Okay, let's go with this one. I'll give it to Adam. If you built a hindsight is 2020 Cardinals roster, pick whoever you want, Arozarena, Galen, Alcantara, all of those guys. How many games would this team win? Just give me a win total.
So actually for the VEB Twitter, I created like a quasi all Cardinals traded away / waiver acquired team or DFA'd players. And
yeah.
I was actually kind of surprised at how good the team was relative to the Cardinals team. I mean, the rotation is night and day better. I mean, you got two like Sandy won it last year, and then Gallen is likely to be your guy this year unless something changes in the second half. But the outfield answers a lot more questions than what the Cardinals have concurrently. Infield, I mean, you take the real Cardinals, but overall, I think they might be worst off just because there's not a lot of depth in that rotation where you would have a guy like Sandy, a guy like Gallen, but you got a 1-2 punch. And after that, it's like Oviedo is your third best starter. And there's just not a whole lot there. So I would say it's fun to kind of just think about, but just in general, I just would just say, assume they're probably still not a playoff caliber team just because there's not a whole lot of depth. There's a few really, really nice names, but I think there's not a lot of you could create like a bullpen obviously, but it's actually quite shocking to see how good the team that you create actually is. But overall, I would probably still take the current Cardinals just because I feel like some of the bad luck would translate hopefully to better luck if they were to run it back in a different simulation versus the actual like made up traded away redemption team against the guys that traded them away. So I'll probably take the current Cardinals just by convention. There's more depth, even though there's probably better top end talent on the other Cardinal team, like the traded away team.
This time I'm just going to throw this out to everybody. Lawbird asked this question, and I'm sorry, Law, we're not going to be able to ask it the way that you want because it's a good question, but we're going to get to this in a trade deadline talk over our next two podcasts. So we'll hit it more. What I'm going to ask you guys, yes or no, the Cardinals are able to pull off some kind of blockbuster-like deal this offseason, either through trading away Montgomery and Flaherty and some of the players, or we're just looking at a bunch of minor trades for minor pieces. Blockbuster, yes. Minor deals, no, I guess. What do you got?
Interesting that he asked that question because he offered one of himself.
He did. Yeah, I mean, it was I'm not doing justice to the post, but
yeah. No, I read the post. I know, and he had something like trading DeYoung, Montgomery, and Flaherty, and we take on some salary of guys who are not likely to pitch, and also get Bobby Miller, who's I think top 25 pitching prospect. Never gonna happen. But I was interested when I looked at the Dodgers' problems this year, how well they match up with a sort of blockbuster trade with the Cardinals. Bobby Miller is one of their 5 starters, and it's Urias and Gonsolin, and then the other 2 guys are pitching prospects that are like 10th to 20th in their system. So they could use 2 starters, honestly, in the rotation. And maybe they can give us, I think, Emmett Sheehan as one of the pieces. He's currently starting, but I don't know if they are comfortable with him starting the rest of the year if they're trying to win a division and do well in the playoffs. And also their starting shortstop is Miguel Rojas. He's got a 56 weighted runs created plus.
Yeah, right.
They could use Paul DeYoung.
They could use
honestly.
Paul DeYoung. Yeah.
They fit weirdly well for a blockbuster sort trade. And I stranger things have happened. Dodgers did that in the past with Scherzer and Turner. Obviously, this is a much smaller scale, but that'd be the easiest way for the Cardinals to maybe improve the return. Because individually, none of the guys that they're going to trade, I don't think are getting us top 50 prospects. Probably not. Or even like the value of a top 50 prospect if you're going to get a guy with a year or 2 of a major league service time. So the Dodgers fit really well, actually. Weirdly.
That's some pretty good analysis. It wasn't a yes or a no, but that's okay. So Adam, Blake, blockbuster or Smalls? What do you got?
I'll lean against the blockbusters, just knowing the Cardinals' history. But if it's going to happen, it's going to have Jordan Montgomery in it. But they'll probably have to package him with something.
Yeah. Adam, bunch of Smalls or a blockbuster?
Probably a bunch of Smalls. It'd be nice to see a pitcher version of a Nolan Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt type trade. But I would probably think that they're probably going to be making more incremental moves to try to improve the team, knowing that a lot of the team's lack of success has been due to lack of luck, as well as smaller problems that they can be fixed within in-house. So I do believe that it's probably going to be more of the same team rather than there's going like with smaller incremental moves rather than a big fresh face that's a star player in the game. And I think that's the former is more likely than the latter in this situation.
Yeah, I'm going to go with, I think there are going to be a lot of Cardinals fans that are going to be really disappointed with this trade deadline. Part of it is that we don't know about Montgomery's health. I mean, I think that plays into it too. And so that could be a factor. And so, yeah, I think that there's a decent chance that Cardinals fans will be underwhelmed in what they do. But you know, that's not unusual for trade deadlines. All right, last question. This is from J-Dog, and I said this one for last because J-Dog's one of our favorites. And so this is an A, B, C, D, or E question for us. J-Dog 55 wants to know which happens first. A, Ollie is fired. B, Mo resigns to start a bow tie museum. C, DeWallet sells the team. D, the Cardinals return to the playoffs. Or E, J-Dog gets that Mazda Miata he's always wanted. Now, do I need to explain to Adam and Blake what a Mazda Miata is? Are you guys, I mean, that's got to be before your time.
I'm somewhat familiar.
All right. Somewhat familiar. So what do you got? Just give me your answer. I think probably we're going to go with Cardinals return to the playoffs.
Yeah, but I'll give J. It looks like J-Dog gets his Miata.
Look, J-Dog, all you got to do to get a Miata, just go out there on eBay, man. They are out there. They got to be cheap. At this point, you could have
and if we're considering that versus the Cardinals making the playoffs, J-Dog's got like a year and a half more to go get the Miata. So that's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time. Yeah.
The Miata's the
you got to go red or purple though, J-Dog. It's got to be red, candy apple red, or purple. If you can get a purple Miata, you are 1994 set for life. I mean, you are just living the dream.
So I have a question related to that. How would you place the order in which those 4 things will happen? We'll ignore the J-Dog thing because that's under his own control. But what's going to happen? Because Mo will at some point resign.
Are we ignoring the bow tie?
Get fired.
We're ignoring the bow tie museum part because that
yes,
equally unlikely.
The Cardinals will at some point make the playoffs. And well, I don't know if we'll sell the team, but maybe. But yeah, I'd say that's 4 clearly. So I guess the other 3 would be my question.
Yeah. So what do you guys got? Playoffs for all of us? Would we go Ollie is fired too? Or Mo resigns?
I think Mo resigns because I think he's done at the end of his contract. So
Okay. All right.
I'll say Mo resigns this too.
So Cards playoffs, Mo resigns, Ollie is fired.
Then DeWallet sells the team.
And then DeWalt sells the team. I think the only way that I don't think that DeWitt the third is ever going to let DeWitt the second, or how many DeWitts are there, sell the team. He wants his shot, and I can't blame him for that. So
Yeah, it's gonna be passed down.
yeah. So all right, guys, that's our mid-season review. A little bit about the All-Star game, a little bit about, or a lot about what exactly has happened and your questions. We will be back in 2 weeks. Just before the All-Star game. Hopefully we will, not the All-Star game. What in the world? I was reading my thing as I said that. Right before the trade deadline, hoping to record on the 27th on a post that will be made on the 29th. Maybe we'll have some trades to talk about. If not, we'll have some that are about to happen, and we'll preview it and give you some examples of what could happen, and all focus on the trade deadline. Then by then we'll probably have an idea whether the Cardinals are definitely sellers or not, but we've got 2 weeks to find out. So for Adam and for Blake and for Gabe, I'm JP, and thanks for your patience in us getting this out, but it was good to be back with you, and we'll see you around the site. Have a very happy Saturday. Thanks, everyone.